You wake up to the sound of rain, not the gentle tapping against a bedroom window, not the comforting sound that makes you want another hour of sleep. This rain is different. It's cold, relentless, heavy enough to turn the ground beneath your feet into thick mud. Every branch drips, every tree seems to leak. The sky has been gray since yesterday, and there's no sign it intends to change. Now imagine you don't have a roof, you don't have dry clothes. You don't have a waterproof jacket, a heater, or a refrigerator full of food waiting inside. You're standing somewhere in prehistoric Europe roughly 60,000 years ago, and the rain has been falling for 3 straight days. Your fire is struggling, your family is hungry, the river beside your camp is rising, and every hour the storm continues. Your chances of surviving become a little smaller. But before we go any further, most people believe 2 things about ancient humans. That they spent every day desperately trying to survive, and that fire was invented for cooking. Both are wrong. The archaeological evidence tells a completely different story. Because for most of human history, one of humanity's deadliest enemies didn't have claws. It didn't have teeth. It simply fell from the sky. Rain. Not because getting wet was uncomfortable, because getting wet could kill you. And the fascinating part is that ancient humans didn't merely survive weeks of relentless storms. They turned those rainy days into some of the most productive moments of their lives. The archaeological evidence tells an extraordinary story, one that completely changes how we think about prehistoric people. Let's begin with the biggest misconception. If I asked what kills someone during a week of heavy rain, most people would probably answer drowning. But modern wilderness medicine tells a different story. The real danger is heat loss. Water removes heat from the human body approximately 25 times faster than air. Researchers studying human thermoregulation have repeatedly shown that wet skin combined with wind dramatically accelerates cooling, making hypothermia possible even when temperatures remain well above freezing. The Wilderness Medical Society continues to identify cold rain as one of the leading causes of accidental hypothermia during outdoor exposure. Your ancestors didn't understand thermal conductivity, but they understood death. They watched people stop shivering. They watched confused speech turn into silence. They watched strong hunters slowly lose the ability to stand. Those lessons were never forgotten. That's why surviving endless rain was never about staying comfortable. It was about protecting body heat. And nothing helped more than fire. Today, making fire takes seconds. A lighter, a match, an electric stove. For your ancestors, fire was something entirely different. It wasn't convenience, it was infrastructure. Once a fire existed, keeping it alive became one of the most important jobs in camp, and archaeology supports exactly that idea. At Wonderwerk Cave in South Africa, archaeologists uncovered burned plant material and bone dating to approximately 1 million years ago. In a landmark 2012 study published in PNAS, Francesco Berna and his colleagues concluded that these remains represented some of the earliest convincing evidence for controlled fire used deep inside a cave rather than the aftermath of a natural wildfire. Then there's Qesem Cave in Israel. Dating to around 400,000 years ago, researchers discovered repeated central hearths surrounded by stone tools and butchered animal bones. According to Rand Barkai and his research team, these weren't occasional campfires. They were maintained repeatedly over long periods, becoming the center of everyday life. Think about what that means. For hundreds of thousands of years, human life revolved around a single flame. But here's what makes the story even more interesting. There's far more archaeological evidence for maintaining fire than for creating it from scratch. That suggests something remarkable. Many prehistoric groups probably didn't wake up each morning and make a new fire. They protected the old one, fed it, moved it, watched over it constantly. Losing it during a week of rain could mean losing warmth, cooked food, protection from predators, and perhaps the group's best chance of surviving until the weather cleared. Fire wasn't simply another tool. It was the center of civilization before civilization existed. So how do you keep a fire alive when everything around you is soaking wet? Again, archaeology and traditional survival knowledge provide surprisingly clear answers. Dead branches hanging beneath dense tree canopies often remain much drier than wood lying on the forest floor. Split logs reveal relatively dry wood hidden inside. Birch bark burns exceptionally well because it contains betulin, a naturally flammable compound that remains effective even when the bark is damp. These aren't modern discoveries. They're observations accumulated across countless generations. Every successful technique survived because somebody remembered it, then taught somebody else. Knowledge became just as important as food. Now imagine the rain continues into another day. Hunting has almost stopped. Animal tracks have disappeared beneath fresh mud. River crossings have become dangerous. The forest itself has become quieter. So what do? You don't sit around waiting, you work. This is one of the biggest surprises hidden in the archaeological record. Excavations across Europe, Africa, and Western Asia repeatedly uncover enormous piles of stone flakes scattered around ancient hearths. To archaeologists, these tiny fragments are called debitage. They're the waste left behind when somebody shapes a stone tool. Thousands upon thousands of flakes tell the same story. People spent long hours making things indoors, not because they enjoyed crafting, because the next successful hunt depended on it. A dull scraper meant slower hide processing. A damaged spear point could mean losing an animal that might feed 20 people. Rainy days became maintenance days, preparation days, investment days. And then researchers discovered something even more remarkable. At Blombos Cave in South Africa, archaeologists uncovered what is now considered one of the world's oldest known pigment workshops. Published in Science by Christopher Henshelwood and his colleagues in 2011, the discovery included abalone shells used as containers, carefully ground red ochre, bone tools for mixing, and evidence of deliberate pigment production dating to roughly 100,000 years ago. Stop and think about that. Outside, a storm may have been raging. Inside, someone patiently mixed pigment, measured ingredients, prepared materials. Not because survival had stopped, because survival included planning for the future. Your ancestors weren't simply reacting to nature. They were engineering solutions to it. And perhaps that's the biggest misunderstanding modern people have about prehistoric life. We imagine ancient humans spending every waking moment searching for food. The evidence tells a much richer story. When rain forced people indoors, something extraordinary happened. Knowledge accumulated. Children watched experienced adults shape stone. Younger hunters learned which rocks fractured best. Older members of the group explained how to repair damaged tools. Skills passed quietly from one generation to the next, beside the light of a carefully protected fire. Anthropologists studying modern hunter-gatherer societies have observed that many complex survival skills are transmitted through repeated observation rather than formal instruction. Rain naturally created those classrooms. Nobody was rushing anywhere. Nobody was distracted. Everyone was together. The storm outside slowed the world just enough for learning to happen, and that may have been one of humanity's greatest advantages. Not sharper claws, not greater strength, shared knowledge, knowledge that accumulated year after year, generation after generation, long before the first cities, long before farming, long before history itself. But tools and fire were only the beginning, because while the rain kept everyone inside, ancient humans started making something even more important. Something that eventually held together shelters, hunting weapons, clothing, and perhaps civilization itself. Rope. And the story behind that invention is even more surprising. If this ancient rainy week has already changed the way you think about your ancestors, tell me in the comments, what would have been your biggest challenge? Keeping the fire alive, finding food, or simply staying warm? The rain still hasn't stopped. By now, the forest has changed completely. The paths you walked only a few days ago have disappeared beneath thick mud. Small streams have become rushing rivers. Fallen leaves cling to every rock, making each step dangerous. Even the air feels different. It's heavier, colder. Every breath carries the smell of wet earth and smoke. If you expected ancient humans to spend these endless rainy days doing nothing but waiting, the archaeological evidence tells a completely different story. Rain didn't stop work. It changed the work that mattered most. Think about your own home. There are always things waiting to be repaired. A loose cabinet, a dull kitchen knife, clothes with small tears, jobs you promise yourself you'll finish when you finally have time. Your ancestors faced exactly the same problem. The difference was that their repairs often determined whether they lived or died. Every hunting trip damaged equipment. Stone blades became dull. Spear points chipped. Wooden shafts cracked after striking bone. Animal hide clothing stretched and tore after weeks of use. Ignoring those problems wasn't an option. The next successful hunt depended on fixing them. This is exactly what archaeologists find inside prehistoric shelters. Across Europe, Africa, and Western Asia, cave excavations repeatedly uncover enormous concentrations of stone flakes surrounding ancient hearths. Archaeologists call these tiny fragments debitage. Every flake represents a moment when someone patiently shaped or repaired a stone tool. These weren't random piles of broken rock. They were workshops, evidence that rainy days became maintenance days. At sites like Qesem River caves in South Africa and numerous Upper Paleolithic caves across France and Spain, researchers have documented repeated episodes of tool manufacture centered around hearths. The pattern appears again and again across thousands of years. The fire wasn't simply providing warmth, it illuminated humanity's first workshop. But stone wasn't the only thing being repaired. Animal hides demanded constant attention. Modern leatherworkers know that untreated hide quickly stiffens, shrinks, and eventually cracks if it isn't processed correctly. Ancient humans learned this lesson long before written history, scraping away fat, stretching hides across wooden frames, softening leather with repeated working, rubbing animal fats into the surface to improve flexibility and water resistance. Ethnographic studies of indigenous Arctic and northern hunter-gatherer societies show that hide preparation often required many days of careful labor. Archaeologists believe similar techniques were practiced deep into prehistory because specialized hide-scraping tools appear throughout the Middle Stone Age archaeological record. Think about how remarkable that really is. While rain hammered against the rocks outside, someone patiently prepared the clothing that would protect the group during the next winter. The storm wasn't delaying survival. The storm was preparing for it. But here's where the story becomes even more fascinating. Ancient humans weren't only repairing old technology. Sometimes they were inventing entirely new technology. One invention in particular changed almost everything: rope. It sounds ordinary, almost boring, until you imagine life without it. Without rope, a spear point cannot be firmly attached to its shaft. Shelters become weaker. Bundles cannot be carried efficiently. Fishing lines don't exist. Traps become almost impossible. Much of human technology depends on something as simple as twisted fibers. For decades, archaeologists assumed early cordage had disappeared because plant fibers decay quickly. Then researchers made an extraordinary discovery. At Aubry du Maras in southern France, microscopic analysis revealed tiny fragments of twisted plant fibers preserved on a Neanderthal stone tool. In 2020, Bruce Hardy and his colleagues published the discovery in Scientific Reports, demonstrating that Neanderthals were manufacturing 3-ply cordage tens of thousands of years ago. That changes everything. Making rope isn't a simple task. First, plant fibers must be stripped from bark or stems. Then they're separated into thin strands. Those strands are twisted individually. Finally, multiple strands are twisted together in the opposite direction so the finished cord doesn't unravel. It's surprisingly sophisticated. Experimental archaeologists have shown that producing even a few meters of strong cord requires planning, coordination, and considerable manual skill. Now imagine doing that while rain pours outside your shelter for an entire week. Suddenly the timing makes perfect sense. Cordage doesn't require sunshine. It requires patience. And rain created plenty of that. But the discoveries don't stop there. Inside Hohle Fels Cave in Germany, archaeologists uncovered an ivory artifact dating to roughly 35,000 years ago. Carved into its surface are carefully shaped spiral grooves. Researchers believe this object functioned as a rope-making tool, allowing plant fibers to be twisted more efficiently and consistently. Think about that for a moment. Someone didn't simply make rope. Someone invented a machine for making rope. That's engineering. 35,000 years before the Industrial Revolution. Innovation didn't begin with metal. It began with necessity. And necessity often arrived with rain. While one person repaired spears, another twisted fibers, another softened hides, someone else worked on making the shelter itself more comfortable. At Sibudu Cave in South Africa, archaeologist Lynn Wadley and her colleagues uncovered one of the oldest known examples of deliberately constructed bedding. Published in Science in 2011, the discovery revealed layers of sedges and grasses dating to approximately 77,000 years ago. But the biggest surprise wasn't the grass. It was the leaves. Mixed into the bedding were leaves from Cape Laurel, a plant known for its insect-repelling properties. That wasn't an accident. Someone selected those plants deliberately. Someone understood they reduced pests. Someone passed that knowledge to the next generation. Researchers also found evidence that old bedding was periodically burned before fresh layers were added. Think about how modern that sounds. Cleaning, replacing mattresses, pest control, 77,000 years ago. Your ancestors weren't simply surviving nature, they were improving their quality of life. Now picture the shelter again. The rain continues outside. Smoke rises toward the cave ceiling. A child watches an older woman scrape a hide. A teenager learns how tightly fibers must be twisted before they become rope. An experienced hunter carefully reshapes a damaged spear point beside glowing embers. Nobody calls this education, but that's exactly what it is. Anthropologists studying modern hunter-gatherers consistently observe that children acquire complex survival skills through long periods of observation and participation rather than formal lessons. Rain naturally created those classrooms. There was nowhere else to go, no distractions, no deadlines, only time. Time to practice, time to teach, time to learn. And perhaps that became humanity's greatest survival strategy. Not stronger muscles, not sharper teeth, shared knowledge. Knowledge that accumulated generation after generation until it became impossible to separate survival from culture itself. But something else was quietly happening around those fires. Something even more important than better tools. People started talking, not about hunting, not about repairing hides, about something much bigger. Stories. Stories that carried memories. Stories that explained the world. Stories that would eventually outlive the people telling them. And in the next part, we'll discover why many anthropologists believe endless rainy nights may have helped shape storytelling, cave art, and perhaps even the earliest foundations of human civilization itself. Before we continue, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Which invention do you think changed human history more? Fire, clothing, or something as simple as rope? Let me know in the comments. The rain finally begins to slow. Not because the clouds have disappeared, not because the danger is over, but because your ancestors have already done everything they could while they waited. The spears have been repaired. The hides are dry enough to wear again. Fresh bedding has replaced the old. The fire, protected through days of relentless storms, is still burning. Now comes the question nobody usually asks. What happens after all the work is finished? Imagine 20 people sitting around the same fire. Children lean against their parents. The oldest members of the group stare into the flames. Outside, water still drips from the trees. But inside, something remarkable is happening. People begin talking, not about making another spear, not about repairing another hide, about everything. This may seem ordinary, but it might be one of the most important moments in the entire story of humanity. Anthropologist Polly Wiesner spent years studying the Jew/Hwanzi hunter-gatherers of southern Africa, one of the world's best-studied traditional hunter-gatherer societies. In a landmark 2014 paper published in PNAS, she discovered something fascinating. During the day, conversations focused almost entirely on practical survival, finding food, tracking animals, resolving conflicts, and organizing daily work. But after sunset, once everyone gathered around the fire, more than 80% of conversations shifted towards storytelling, myths, personal experiences, rituals, songs, and social relationships. Think about that. The fire didn't simply warm the body, it changed the human mind. Darkness transformed conversation itself. Now imagine what happened after 4 or 5 days of continuous rain. Nobody was hunting, nobody was traveling, everyone stayed together. Those conversations probably became even longer. Children heard stories they had never heard before. Experienced hunters described dangerous animals. Grandparents explained which valleys flooded first after heavy rain. Parents taught which mushrooms appeared after storms and which ones could kill you. None of this knowledge existed in books. It survived entirely inside human memory, and memory only survives if someone keeps telling the story. This is what anthropologists call cultural transmission. Perhaps the greatest invention in human history wasn't a spear, or fire, or clothing. Perhaps it was the ability to pass knowledge from one generation to the next without losing it, because every story carried practical information. Where to find water during drought, how to recognize an injured animal from its footprints, which plants could heal wounds, which caves flooded every spring. One forgotten story could cost lives, one remembered story could save them. But here's where the story becomes even stranger. Some people eventually left the warmth of the fire altogether, not to hunt, not to gather food, to create. Take Chauvet Cave in southern France. Around 36,000 years ago, people carried small animal fat lamps deep into complete darkness. Archaeologists have documented paintings of lions, rhinoceroses, horses, cave bears, and mammoths executed with astonishing technical skill. Radiocarbon dating, led by Jean Clotes and colleagues, confirmed that much of this artwork belongs to the Aurignacian period, making it among the oldest known masterpieces of prehistoric Europe. These weren't rough sketches. The artists understood anatomy, movement, perspective. Some animals even appear to move when illuminated by flickering firelight. It almost resembles animation. Then there is Sulawesi in Indonesia. For decades, many researchers believed Europe was the birthplace of figurative art. That assumption changed dramatically in 2019. Using uranium series dating, Maxime Aubert and his colleagues published evidence in Nature showing that a hunting scene painted inside Liang Bulu Sipong Cave was at least 43,900 years old, while other figurative paintings in Sulawesi date to more than 45,000 years ago. The discovery completely transformed our understanding of early human creativity. Art wasn't born in one place. It appears to have emerged wherever humans carried imagination into darkness. Now, here's something fascinating. Most prehistoric cave paintings aren't located near the entrance. Many lie hundreds of meters inside cave systems. Reaching them required planning, artificial light, extra fuel, and valuable time. Nobody accidentally wandered there. Can archaeologists prove these paintings were created during rainy weeks? No. The evidence simply doesn't preserve weather conditions from a particular afternoon. But what archaeology does prove is equally remarkable. Ancient humans repeatedly invested enormous amounts of time creating symbolic art in places where survival alone cannot explain their behavior. They weren't just surviving, they were expressing ideas, sharing beliefs, creating meaning. Perhaps endless days inside shelters gave people something they rarely experienced while constantly moving across the landscape. Time to imagine, time to remember, time to create, and when the rain finally stopped, the world outside had changed. Fresh mud covered the forest floor. For hunters, that wasn't bad news. It was an opportunity. Master tracker Louis Liebenberg, whose research on persistence hunting and indigenous tracking has transformed modern anthropology, explains that damp soil preserves footprints with extraordinary detail. Fresh tracks reveal the direction of travel, the number of animals, their speed, and sometimes even whether an animal was injured. Rain erased yesterday's tracks, but it created perfect new ones. The storm had reset the landscape. Food changed, too. Ecologists have long documented that mushrooms often fruit rapidly after sustained rainfall. Earthworms emerge near the surface. Amphibians become more active. In tropical Africa, termites leave their colonies in enormous reproductive swarms following heavy rain. These swarms provide one of the richest natural sources of protein and fat available. Jane Goodall famously documented chimpanzees harvesting termites using simple tools, demonstrating how valuable these insects can be. Early humans almost certainly exploited the same seasonal abundance, although probably on an even larger scale. Rain didn't remove food, it rearranged it. The groups that understood those changes adapted. The groups that didn't slowly disappeared from history. Now step back and look at the bigger picture. A single week of rain accomplished something extraordinary. It protected knowledge. It repaired technology. It strengthened families. It improved shelters. It encouraged teaching. It inspired stories. Perhaps it even created art. Modern people often imagine progress happening during dramatic moments, a great battle, a successful hunt, the discovery of agriculture. But human history was also shaped during quiet moments, sitting beside a carefully protected fire, listening to older voices, watching skilled hands transform stone, leather, bone, and wood into tools that would keep everyone alive. Those quiet hours mattered, generation after generation, for hundreds of thousands of years. And maybe that's why rain still affects us today. Psychologists have found that moderate rainfall often encourages reflection, slower thinking, and sustained attention to indoor activities. We call it a quiet day inside. Your ancestors called it preparation. The technology has changed. The instinct hasn't. The next time rain keeps you indoors, remember this: long before cities, long before roads, long before history books, your ancestors listened to that same sound. Rain striking leaves, rain soaking the earth, rain surrounding a shelter where families repaired tools, protected fire, shared stories, and passed knowledge to children who would one day teach their own. Civilization wasn't built only under blue skies. Some of its strongest foundations were laid while storms raged outside. Perhaps rain was never humanity's enemy. Perhaps it was one of our greatest teachers. If you've made it this far, I'd love to hear your answer to one question. What do you think ancient humans gained most from those long, rainy weeks? Better technology, stronger family bonds, storytelling, or something entirely different? Share your thoughts in the comments because I genuinely love to read your perspective.